Welcome everybody. My name is Emily here at the New York-Presbyterian Hudson Valley Hospital's Teaching Kitchen. So honored to have my colleague and our wonderful lactation consultant, Sonia Matheson, joining us today. She's amazing and a registered dietitian, as well as having this amazing wealth of body and specialty in lactation consulting. So really great treat for all of you out there who are joining us. A few Zoom ground rules as we begin. Just a reminder to keep your microphone on mute. So this is a good opportunity to just check your screen, make sure your microphones are muted throughout the presentation. In case there's any background noise, we can try to mitigate that. This is a small group today, so definitely bring your questions. Sonia runs our breastfeeding support group, so she's used to a lot of questions, and she's very good at answering them.
And I love that because it keeps things going. So
yeah, absolutely. So with that, we're going to begin. We're going to be making 3 recipes today, and if it's all right with you, Sonia, I'd like to jump in and just start by making the muffin recipe so we can get those right into the oven, and then we'll turn it over to you for a few questions. Does that sound okay?
Sounds perfect. Sounds great.
All right, excellent. So for those of you who signed up in advance, you received our PDF and our booklet, and we're going to be making the recipe on the 3rd or 4th page here, the pumpkin chocolate chip lactation muffins. Now, you can put chocolate chips in these or not. It's up to you. So in the ingredient list, I think I left them off, but they're always better with chocolate chips, of course. If you wanted to make them a little bit healthier, you can leave the chocolate chips out. So that's up to you. If you are going to add them, I would just make a note. About 1/4 cup to 1/3 of a cup is how much you would be adding. All right. So let's start with that recipe. It's nice and easy. It does have quite a few ingredients, but they're all really healthy and good for us. Things like eggs, which we know are a great source of protein. So we have 2 eggs going in. We're going to be using pureed, organic pureed pumpkin from a can, but you could use, if you had a pumpkin that you were roasting, you could use that too, like scrape out the flesh of a roasted pumpkin. Feel free to try that out. This is the canned pumpkin that we have here, so about 1 cup of that. And just a note on the canned pumpkin, if you didn't have canned pumpkin, you could also use like a baked flesh from a baked sweet potato. That would work just fine, or even butternut squash. So there's a few options for substitutions here. I've also made this recipe with 1 cup of mashed banana instead of the pumpkin, and that works too. The only thing I would note about that is bananas are a lot sweeter than pumpkin, right? So they might end up being a little bit sweeter if if you're using that instead. So
also,
we have
really
about 1 cup of that.
Of potassium.
Banana or pumpkin?
All of them. All of them.
Awesome. All right, so let's throw in, that's our cup of pumpkin puree. We're going to use about 1/2 cup of oil and 1/2 cup of honey. So a good tip for this is measure out the oil first. I have some coconut oil here that I melted. Measure out the oil first, and then it's going to be a lot easier to measure out the honey because the measuring cup will be nice and oiled. So the honey just slides right out instead of being super sticky. So here's about 1/2 cup of honey. If you wanted to use a different sweetener, maple syrup works as well. Of course, these are muffins, so they're intended to be nice and sweet. All right, so look at this. This is like clean, like it never even had honey in it. Such a great trick. Once I learned that, I really, I always measure my oil first now. So those are our wet ingredients. Oh, I almost forgot we're adding some applesauce to this too. Now make sure whenever you're buying applesauce that you buy unsweetened variety, because I'm sure, Sonia, you know that a lot of applesauce has tons of sugar added to it. So beware.
That is true.
Let's add that in. All right. So that's pretty much it for the wet ingredients. We're just going to start and kind of whisk these together. Break up those egg yolks. And then we're going to add our dry ingredients. And it's nice and easy here. We're going to add a whole wheat flour. The variety of whole wheat flour that I'm using today is a white whole wheat flour. The difference being that it's a little bit more of a tender variety of wheat. So it's a little bit better for baking if you can find white wheat, also known as whole wheat pastry flour. So you can use that. This is our 1 cup of whole wheat pastry flour, 2/3 of a cup of almond meal. So if you're not familiar with that, that's this kind of almond flour, right? So that's basically just ground up almonds, which is great. There's lots of fiber and protein. So you're adding some nuts. We're gonna add about 3 tablespoons of ground flaxseed, and 2 tablespoons of brewer's yeast powder. So this is a product you're probably not familiar with unless you are currently breastfeeding, then you've probably heard of it. Let's not forget, we have some baking soda, about a teaspoon going in there, and our baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon. Oh, and I almost forgot our vanilla extract. That's always good flavor. Let's add a teaspoon there. And then we'll just kind of mix this all together. We're gonna add our walnuts and our chocolate chips if you want. So that's up to you. So while I'm mixing this, and I'm gonna show you the texture of it. I switched from a whisk to a spatula, and you never want to overmix your batter whenever you're making muffins. You just want to mix it until everything's nice, homogeneous, well combined, because anything that has a wheat flour in it, if you keep mixing it, you're going to start developing the strands of gluten that's in that flour, and that's going to make your baked goods kind of tough. So we don't want to bite into a muffin that's tough. Nobody likes a tough muffin, right? So nice and tender, fold it together, all right? And this is our mixture. So you can see kind of has this nice texture, muffin texture. So I'm gonna add the walnuts, kind of crush those up. And I'm not gonna add chocolate chips in these ones today. I'm gonna leave them a little healthier because I know we have our registered dietitian on the line here. All right.
So appreciated.
So as I begin to kind of scoop these out into our prepared muffin tin. So I've got my little liners set up here in my muffin pan. Sonia, if you'd like to talk to us a little bit about what is the key to building supply when it comes to lactation?
So the real key to building the supply is emptying your breasts. So there are lactogenic foods or foods that will assist with your supply, but the best way to create your supply is to put the baby to the breast and to really make sure your breasts get empty, because the signals that the brain gets is when my breasts are empty, I need to refill them. So right. We usually recommend that when you're feeding your baby, you always feed a meal, quote unquote meal, on one side, you burp the baby, and you always offer that second side so that the baby is getting a meal, quote unquote meal, on one side, meaning they're there longer. So it's more likely that they're going to empty that breast, because the signal that the brain gets is, oh, we have an empty breast and a half empty breast. That means we need to refill. Versus if we move the baby over, so old time, they used to say, oh, we do 15 minutes and 15 minutes. The message the brain gets is that we're half full. And if we're half full, we don't necessarily need to refill, but we do want to refill. So it's always better to quote unquote empty a breast first, or at least one, to make sure that the brain knows the signals. Everything is based on the brain, which is one reason these foods that we're giving you are fairly high in omega-3 fatty acids. Notice what Emily put in. We put in the almond flour, which is made from almonds. There's walnuts in there. There's coconut oil in there. There were flax seeds in. Yep, flax seeds were in there. All of those things are very high in omega-3 fatty acids. That's going to help keep your body fluid and the milk flowing through. And that also puts your breast milk at a higher rate of fatty acids, the EPA and the AHA, which everybody knows. Everybody has a base nutrition line for their breast milk, but obviously the more healthy you eat, the higher those levels are in your breast milk. So
that's a great explanation. Thank you. And does anyone in our audience have any questions about that? That was a lot. That was really good. That was a lot of information. It was great though. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? It's like if if you have a breast that's not empty, then the brain's not going to know to fill it, right? It's like, well,
Right.
it's half full, so I don't need to do the work. And, you know,
Right.
it
I don't
kind of
need to
makes sense.
refill
It's the
something
same
that's
thing.
not
Like if
empty.
you're, right. It's kind of the same thing. Like if you're not hungry, then the brain doesn't really know it's time to eat, right?
Right.
Kind of a
Right.
similar
I mean,
mechanism.
you're not going to change a toilet paper roll that's not empty. So the brain's
Yeah.
not going to fill a boob that's not empty.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Thank you. Any questions, Alita, from our audience?
Chef Emily, there are no questions at this point.
Okay. So I guess I have a question for you, Sonia. Before I jump to the next recipe, what dietary and lifestyle recommendations do you have for new moms that support breast milk supply?
So what I would do is make sure that one, you get enough sleep, which is really, really hard when you have a new baby. So when that baby is sleeping, you should absolutely be sleeping. You need to put aside your emails, your text messages, your social media, and take a nap. If your body isn't recovering itself, your body won't make that milk. So that's the first thing. The second thing is make sure you're drinking to thirst. If you are not hydrated, your body can hold back your supply. Drinking too much water won't make more milk, but not drinking enough can hold back your supply. And I almost always encourage moms to drink the electrolyte water, not the sugar drinks like Gatorade. But notice in these recipes, we've got a lot of, and you'll see in other ones, and even in this one, a lot of vegetables, a lot of root vegetables particular as well. You've got pumpkins, you've got sweet potatoes, you've got yams, you've got lots of fruits and veggies. You're talking about getting those electrolytes in, right?
Yeah.
And that's important for your body to stay in sync with itself for staying hydrated. So that's the second thing. The other thing is get outside. Do not be afraid to take your baby outside for a walk. Whether it's in a carrier, whether it's in a walk, you yourself will benefit from getting fresh air, as will the baby. That will also help you make more milk by breathing in that air, getting that oxygenation, getting that exercise will keep your body moving. So that will also help. And of course, making milk is emptying the breasts. Choosing a variety of foods. Like I said previously, the healthier your diet is, the healthier your milk will be. Your body will automatically put in the 260 components that breast milk has, but obviously the healthier your diet is, the healthier your breast milk will be. And I think, Emily, if I'm correct, that packet I sent you this morning.
Yeah, everybody has that. Yep.
Okay, great. Has a bunch of basic different categories of the foods and why we're choosing them. Most of them are very nutrient dense, full of those electrolytes and those omega-3 fatty acids. What that does is trigger the brains. Go ahead.
If you'd like to review that information, it's possible that people haven't had a chance to look at it yet. So feel free to go through it. We have time.
So on that first page, we've got that lectogenic foods, which is we're going to go through. So foods that are lactogenic are foods that contain tryptophan and saponins, plant sterols, all of those things, phytoestrogens, all of those things are similar to your electrolytes, where it keeps your body fluid and it helps your body make milk. Okay. Milk is actually made from blood. So we want to keep your blood levels of these high enough to create that milk supply. So that's what we're looking for. You can see the carrot, the beets, the yams. Those are the root vegetables that I'm talking about. And they contain phytoestrogens. I think everybody kind of knows that name, phytoestrogen, right? We know that that's a female hormone. And estrogen in itself, along with progesterone, are actually fairly low when you're lactating, and that's normal. So having a phytoestrogen will actually help that supply stay up. It triggers prolactin, which is the hormone that makes milk. Okay. There are some things like raw beet that help iron. right? To help your absorption of iron. And iron is works in the creation of red blood cells. So the more red blood cells you make, the more blood you have, the more milk you're going to make, right? Because milk is made from blood.
Right.
Okay.
So blood building foods would be useful.
Correct. Yep.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
And is there a difference between different types of iron? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yes. There's iron from animal foods and there's iron from plant-based foods. Both are good for you. Oftentimes we need, how do I explain the absorption part?
Yeah, I think of it as like, it's like turmeric and black pepper. Like in order to enhance the availability of the iron in plant-based sources, you have to combine it with some source of vitamin C. Say that's a good explanation? Correct.
Yeah, I would absolutely say to increase the absorption of any iron. I thought you were looking for the difference between the irons. No, absolutely. If the citric acid or something acidic will absolutely help the absorption of iron from your iron sources. And beyond meat, chicken, and fish, which are foods high in iron, you do have the dark green leafy vegetables that are high in iron. And you will find that breast milk is not high in iron. It is not necessary because the absorption rate from the baby is very, very high. There is much more, if you look at a comparison, you're going to see much more iron availability, much more higher iron level in formula than you will find in what is in breast milk. They need more iron in formula because of the lack of absorption there. So that the requirement is higher because the absorption is lower, versus in breast milk, they don't need so much iron because the absorption in breast milk is higher.
That's so interesting. And could that be one of the reasons why sometimes if a baby moves to formula, they become more constipated as from the iron?
Correct. Yep,
Okay.
Because they need so much iron, that high level of iron creates that constipation. And if anybody is pregnant out there, or well, you guys have all had at least been pregnant, you know that constipation is there. A lot of that is from the iron that's in your prenatal. So yes, it absolutely can create some constipation. The poop definitely changes when you go to formula.
Yeah.
That is true.
Great, thank you. Yeah. All right, so that's all really good information. Alita, any questions from our little group today?
Yes, there is one question from Chris.
Okay.
It says, while these recipes are geared towards lactating moms, are these recipes suitable for other people, like dads?
Yeah, 100%. Anything we put in here is going to be healthy for everybody. These are just specific foods that can help mom make more milk and keep her body healthy. It'll absolutely keep dads and grandmas and anybody else healthy, and younger kids too, not just babies.
I have to say, the next recipe that we're about to make is one that I make for myself all the time. Because I made it for a class we did, I think a few years back, and I really liked it. And I feel like the brewer's yeast actually kind of like gave me a little bit of a boost of energy. So I enjoy it, and so far so good. So do you want to talk a little bit about brewer's yeast, because this is one that may not be familiar to folks?
Yeah, so brewer's yeast, and I'm gonna be honest with you, they are not 100% sure why brewer's yeast actually works, but it seems to help a lot of people. It does have omega-3s in it. What I think really works about it is it's got some bacteria in it, type thing, that yeast, those little boogers that eat things.
Yeah.
And that actually helps your body kind of kick into gear and make more. It's got omega-3s in it. It's got fiber in it. It's got
pretty high in B vitamins too, which was surprising to me.
Most whole grain foods are high in B vitamins. It's what comes in that kernel part of the wheat seed, and that's really the go-to. The B vitamins are very, very helpful in keeping your supply elevated, which is good. Again, it's all about, B vitamins are great for a lot of things, for your heart, for breastfeeding, for keeping you hydrated.
Yeah.
They are
For
water
energy,
soluble,
for the
so
nervous system. Yeah, it's
right,
amazing.
correct. So, you know, all of that, I mean, as far as brewer's yeast, there's really, they don't know the exact reason, but for some reason, all of those reasons, because they're high in B12, because they have omega-3s in there, that seems to be what keeps the body kind of working the way it should. You know, our microbiomes and our processed foods have kind of hurt our systems in that way. So by eating these foods that are less processed, putting them back into our system, it helps our bodies work in a way that they're supposed to work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Alita, any other questions? I think I saw one pop up.
And no, it wasn't a question. It was just a comment from one of the participants who thought
Okay,
that
very good.
sounded good for everyone.
Great. All right, fantastic. So with that, we'll jump to our next recipe, which is the sunflower seed butter lactation bites. Now, these can be made with sunflower seed butter or almond butter or peanut butter, whatever you prefer. I like to use either almond or sunflower seed. I included the sunflower seed specifically for people who can't tolerate nuts. If you are one of those people, then this is something you can still make, as it doesn't contain any nuts. It's just the sunflower seed butter or almond butter, but obviously if that's not for you, then use the sunflower seed butter, which is just as delicious. So you can see we're featuring our brewer's yeast again, our flaxseed again, and in this recipe, we're going to add some rolled oats, some dark cocoa powder. So this is 100% dark, a little pinch of salt, and this one does get some little mini chocolate chips. So we're going to add all that in there, along with some maple syrup, a little bit of vanilla, and the almond butter or sunflower butter, depending on what you prefer. Sonia, what is your take on rolled oats? And is there...
Yep.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
So the oats, along with the brewer's yeast and any other really barley as well, whole grains, are very high in those B vitamins. So that is what is kind of key, and the phytoestrogens, mind you, both of those things is what is keeping your body making that milk.
Okay. So oats are good. And does it matter what form of oats you enjoy? Instant oats, rolled oats, steel cut oats? What's the difference?
So it should be the steel cut or the rolled oats. The least processed is really what you want. The more processed the item is, the more they take out of that item. So we don't want to work with instant oats. We want to work with those whole oats. And that's with almost any grain you're talking about. The more they work with it, the more they take the natural B vitamins out of it, which is why way back when they were looking at cereals and everything else, those were becoming popular when World War I and II. They started enriching all of the cereals with the B vitamins that they were taking out during processing. So while they are replacing them, they're obviously not natural. So the absorption rate is a little bit lower. We want to encourage that natural B vitamin levels that come in those foods. And so the least processed manufacturing processing that we do, the better whole nutrition we're going to get out of that item.
Okay, that's really good advice, because I know there's so many people who rely on the convenience of the instant oats, but I think rolled oats and steel cut oats can be just as convenient if you know how to work with them. Another thing that I'm going to mention to everybody is oats do not have to be cooked in order to be eaten. So in this recipe, for example, they are raw, and we're just going to eat them just like this, mixed in with everything else. I think, they do draw some moisture out of your system. So if you are enjoying oats in their raw state, which you can, just make sure you have a big glass of water, right?
Absolutely. And also oats are also very good if you can absolutely make them ahead in big batches, that if you wanted to cook them up, you certainly can cook them and, freeze or refrigerate and make ahead, so that you're not always you know, having to cook fresh.
Right. That's a great suggestion. You can even do like some of the overnight oat recipes or the baked oatmeal recipes. Those are really good too. And the baked oatmeal is almost like feels like a dessert to me sometimes, because you can like bake in some bananas and fruit and things like that. So those are some great options. Thank you for reminding us of that. And for the steel cut oatmeal, it does take 40 minutes to cook it, but you can, like Sonia said, you can make a big batch ahead of time, and then you can just have it ready and heat it up. One of the things I actually like to do for the steel cut oatmeal is I put it in, you know, measure it out, water and oats as much as indicated on the back of the package, and then put that pot of water with the oats, bring it to a boil, right? You can do this before you go to bed, right? So bring it to a boil, then turn the heat off, leave the pot out on the stove with the flame off. Do not go to sleep with the flame on, and go to bed. And then the next morning, the oats will have absorbed a lot of that hot water. You'll only need to cook it for 5 to 10 minutes and they'll be ready. So it's really, really easy to do it that way.
And it's really great if you add the dried fruit within the oatmeal mix.
Yeah.
Get lots of potassium, fiber, vitamin A, and vitamin C's. So
Right.
once it's cooked, you can add those dried fruits in there, and you'll get a lot of that extra. And then you're getting soluble and insoluble fiber. So the oats that are giving you soluble fiber, you've got your fruit will give you the insoluble fiber, helping that oat move through.
I love that. And if you're using prunes, those are really high in iron, correct?
They are.
So that could be a good option too. All right, so here these are our beautiful little bites. You can see how quick and easy they are to come together. They're really, really tasty, and hopefully this can just be like something that's grab and go, easy for you to keep in your purse or something like that. And yeah, I hope you give these a try. They're really yummy. All right, so our muffins smell good. So let's just check on these. They're starting to slightly brown. Ooh. So I'm just gonna see if they spring back. Not quite yet. You'll let them go a little bit longer. So I just gently tap the top, and if the top indents where my finger tapped, then they're not ready yet. If I tap the top and it kind of springs back, then they are ready. That's a simple way to tell. You can always also do the toothpick test and things like that if you want to. All right, do we have any questions from the audience before we jump to our third recipe?
Yes, we do. So
Okay.
question one is, this recipe calls for maple syrup. What about using a pancake syrup like Mrs. Butterworth or Vermont Maid?
So,
You want to answer that, or you want me to answer that?
I know. I think we both have a similar response, which is don't do it.
Correct.
Sonia, why don't you go ahead?
All right. So natural maple syrup comes directly from the tree. It's sap from the tree. It's maple syrup. Those other quote unquote pancake syrups, if you look at the ingredients, they are high fructose corn syrups or they're sugars. They're man-made sweeteners in there and fillers in there, and color in there too, mind you. So it's always better to use something that comes from nature. If you look at price per unit, it's not that much more expensive to get a natural maple syrup than it is to buy those manufactured other syrups. It is a little more expensive, but what you're doing for your body is multiple, way over the top for that versus using the high fructose corn syrup versus the natural sugar. Just makes just as much healthier for our body.
Yeah, great answer. And I share your enthusiasm. And maple syrup tastes so much better if it's real maple syrup. The taste is totally different.
Yeah, totally.
I will say in terms of cost, I try to find, when maple syrup goes on sale, sometimes it'll go from like $20 for a container to $16. Buy 2 or 3. It's sugar, so you can keep it in your pantry and keep it for a while. And I mean like a year, a while, right? So definitely stock up. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, as a substitution, if you don't have maple syrup for this recipe, you can also use honey. So good raw, a good raw honey would be fine as well if you wanted to make that swap.
And honestly, I think I went to the ShopRite the other day and it was $9.99 for real maple syrup. It's really not that expensive for what it is and how long it lasts. You really don't need a lot of it for that sweetness.
Right. And I do store maple syrup in the refrigerator because sometimes after you open it, a little film of mold can form. And if that does happen, there is a trick. You can actually put it in a pot and boil it. And, just bring it to a boil, then put it in a clean container, and that will kill off anything that was growing in there. So you can save it because, we do spend a little money on it. So it's good to not have to waste it. All right, great. I hope that answers, that question. Any other questions, Alita?
Yeah, there is one. It says that steel oat or rolled oats are both good, but not instant oat. That's a question.
That is correct. So because the steel cut oats and the rolled oats are raw oat in the full form, whereas the instant oatmeal, they break that down and process it. So it's not in that whole form. They break the fiber down and the kernel down. So that's what we don't want to use. We want to use the whole piece.
Which is why it takes only an instant to cook, right? Because there's nothing really in there that needs to be cooked. It's already kind of been stripped and taken out. Yeah. Anything else, Alita?
Yeah, there's just one more just came in. Do you store unopened syrup in the refrigerator?
No. So if it's not opened, you can leave it in the pantry, cool, dark pantry somewhere, and it'll be fine.
And that's it for now, Chef Emily.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll jump to our third recipe, which is in your packets as well, which is the smoothie recipe. So you can do banana, you can do berries if you want to make it a little less sweet. So of course, smoothies are great because you can really customize them, play around with them depending on what you have in the house, and just make them to your own taste and liking. So similarly, you can use frozen fruit, frozen banana if you want a cold milkshake, if you want that texture. And we're going to throw in some raw spinach. So about half a cup of raw spinach. And here we go again with the leafy greens and the iron, right? And I have some almond milk here. So about 2 cups. Similarly, if you wanted to use a different, kind of milk that you're used to and that you enjoy, feel free to do that. I'm going to throw in some of our oats, actually going in here, about 2 tablespoons. We're going to blend that right in. We're going to add a little pinch of cinnamon. Now, this is mostly for flavor, so again, that's up to you, but I really like it with banana and all the other good stuff. And then we've got our brewer's yeast and our flax seeds. So let's throw those in. And what else am I forgetting? Oh, and we have some peanut butter. So if you want to add a nut butter, peanut butter, whatever kind of nut or seed butter, if you're using sunflower seed again. Don't use butter. I have a friend, I told her, she's European, and I told her how I make my smoothies. And she was like, oh, okay, almond butter, got it. And then she didn't have any almond butter and she used butter. And she's like, wow, that smoothie was really rich. So, I never like to assume what people know, because you never know. All right, so we're adding that in, and this is simple. It just all gets blended up. So again, you can really see our focus today is on like quick, grab and go, easy to put together, stress-free. The muffins you can prepare ahead of time. If you're pregnant, you can even make them ahead of your delivery date and freeze them. So you have your lactogenic muffins ready for you when you come out of the hospital, and just defrost them, in a toaster oven or overnight in the refrigerator or something like that. Hold on, I'm just gonna get some noise here. So I threw some berries in because I like the color.
So while we're waiting, I'm going to mention something about the almond milk, the oat milks, any of those milks.
Yeah.
You know that they don't have the same nutritional value as the whole foods in themselves. They are completely processed. Obviously, you need liquid in there. And a lot of them do have added sugar. So do pay attention to what you purchase. You do want to, try and buy the unsweetened versions or the unflavored versions. There's also soy milk, which has phytoestrogens in there, so that would be okay. But any of those fluids that do, some people think, oh, they just take almonds and then they make them into milk.
Yeah.
But there is a processing to that. So certainly if you're looking to get away from milk in itself, it is not necessary for anybody to get that dairy. So you can obviously use these other choices, and I'm glad they're out there. Very good plant-based liquids. But do watch, they do oftentimes have added sugar to them.
Yeah, so thank you so much for mentioning that, because it's so important that we look at our ingredient list, that we look at our labels, because that's where our information is. And that's the only power we have as consumers to know really what we're putting in our bodies. So if we look at this almond milk, for example, the ingredients are water, almonds, and then further ingredients are calcium carbonate, sunflower lecithin, sea salt, natural flavors, locust bean gum, gellan gum, and potassium citrate. So Sonia, do you want to walk us through some of those ingredients?
Yeah, if I can
if you can pronounce them.
So,
all right, so calcium carbonate.
So that's added calcium that they add to almonds, because we know that people drink milk and eat yogurt for the calcium that's in that. So what they're trying to do is make a decent equivalent, because they know that people are using this milk in replacement for dairy, most likely.
Got it.
The other gums that are in there are usually things that kind of hold everything together. They're hold placers, and they keep the texture there. And a lot of them are preservatives that are in there, so that it stays fresh.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. If you do want to embark upon making your own nut milks, it is a process, but it's actually fun. And then you can use the pulp from your nut milk. You can stick it in your freezer, and anytime you make a pot of oatmeal, throw some in with your oatmeal. There's lots of fun things you can make, like crackers from the pulp of. So it's a process. And I don't think that if you're out there having a newborn baby, you're going to be making your own nut milks necessarily. But perhaps if you're feeling, adventurous one day, you can give it a try. So we have just a few moments left. Does anyone have further questions for Sonia, Alita?
Yes, there's a couple of questions here. It says, how much less nutritious is instant oats compared to rolled or steel oats? And I want to know, is this sort of like whole wheat or brown rice compared to white rice?
It is very similar. There is a huge difference between, you can look at the labels and see the most noticeable difference is the fiber. I think instant oatmeal probably has 0 to 1 gram of fiber per serving.
Yeah.
And there's probably
4.
Double or quadruple. That's quadruple. So it's definitely, there's fiber. It also has, the whole grain oats has other vitamins in them naturally that get processed out when they go through that stripping process. They really do take everything out. So absolutely.
This has tons of iron in it.
So that is, what is that? That oatmeal?
This is the rolled oats. Yeah.
That's the rolled oats. Yeah. So there is iron that's attached to the kernel. So because they're not breaking the kernel, you're getting that iron. So once they break that kernel of that oat, you really lose a lot of the fiber. It is similar to white brown rice kind of thing, but even brown rice is more processed than other artisan grains like farro or barley or quinoa. Those would be better choices because they're a little more whole, less processed. Brown rice is obviously better than white. But instant like is always worse. Right? Yeah, there's a spectrum, and instant is always not as nutritious, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing, right? It's whenever something, you always have to question when something becomes that convenient. What are we sacrificing? What are we giving up instead for that convenience?
There's a reason they're in the center of the grocery store. Usually we tell people, as a dietitian, I usually say, always shop the outside of the store. Always, and that's where you should be getting your foods. The center aisles are a little less. But if you notice, the beans are where the uncooked beans and rices are a lot of the time where the vegetables are located. You've got all your dairy or dairy type. Right. Nuts and seeds are usually on the outside. So a lot of those things are always on the outside.
That's a great reminder. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? We have one more minute to go.
There was a question about the recipe. The recipe says 25 boils, and somebody said you made 7. So they want to know if you just made generous size boils.
Oops. Sorry, that's supposed to say 5, not 25. I think it's just a typo. Yeah. So I made 6, 7, 8. So 8, I guess, is the right. 5 big ones or 8 kind of like that size ones, more bite-sized ones. Sorry about that. Typos.
And then the last question was, should we use cow milk or almond milk?
For the smoothie, so it's up to you. So as Sonia mentioned, you can really use whichever kind of milk you're used to that you enjoy. I used almond milk today, but again, you can use the cow's milk if you like. Are there any, I guess, Sonia, are there any adverse foods that people shouldn't be eating if they're breastfeeding? And is milk one of them, or is that okay?
There is no foods that as a breastfeeding person you have to avoid. So any of those milks would be absolutely fine. You do want to see that there's some calcium in there. You do want to make sure that it is unsweetened, but any of those milks are certainly fine. You don't need to avoid any foods. Well, when you're pregnant, you do, but not when you're breastfeeding. But as far as these fluids, there isn't anything that you can't choose from. So I'm going to say, if you like the taste of coconut milk, because it tastes a little bit like coconut, use it. If you like the oat milk, use that. As far as will it help lactogenically? Probably not, because those foods are fairly processed, but it wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And is there another? I see a lot of activity in the chat. Alita, are there any other questions before we wrap up?
Yes, that there's 1 or 2. Most of them are thanking you for a wonderful class and the fact that they learned so much about oats. There's a question here, why avoid parsley and sage when pregnant?
So it's not when you're pregnant, it's when you're lactating. You don't need to avoid and somebody looks through my packet because that's the very last line in the packet. So the sage, the peppermint, and the parsley, they're actually items that we have moms use when we want them to wean. So those are things that will actually affect your supply negatively. So you want, when you are breastfeeding, you want to avoid the sage, the peppermint, and the parsley. There's a chemical in them that can actually affect your milk supply, and your brain shuts it down. So we want to make sure that we don't, eating a little bit of those foods is certainly fine, but you don't want to, oftentimes around Thanksgiving, I always say, if you put sage in your stuffing, take the sage out or cut it in half.
Use thyme instead.
Right, exactly. So thyme does not affect in the same way.
Interesting. Would peppermint tea be acceptable, or is that a no as well?
I would have, peppermint tea is probably okay. It's the peppermint oils that is what can affect your supply. So depending on, if it's the whole leaves, but peppermint flavored tea should be fine. But a lot of times I'll tell people when they're looking to decrease their supply, pop Altoids. So it is anything that has the peppermint oils in there is helpful.
That's a great tip. Thank you, Sonia. That's great. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for tuning into our class today. I really appreciate your engagement, your questions, and thank you so much to Alita, as always, for moderating these programs, and to our wonderful guest, Sonia Matheson. So appreciate your time and knowledge on this subject. I learned something from you every single time, so I'm so grateful to you for sharing your wisdom with our community.
Thanks,
all right,
Emily.
everybody.
Hi, Jen.
See you all. Take care.